Entering the Pat Mayo Experience.
Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, continuing our NFL draft coverage. If you missed Wednesday's show with Emery Hunt from theathletic.com, give your head a shake. What's wrong with you? But you can hit the description of this video or podcast and go check that out after you listen to this show. And if you want to get into a draw for 20 DraftKings dollars, if you're watching the video, smash the like, leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section and tell me your top 3 running backs in this draft class that you would like your team to draft. Maybe not with a first round pick, but somewhere along the line. In a hypothetical world where they all fall to the 4th round, give me the top 3 that you'd like. You want to get into a draw for 100 DraftKings dollars, the big one? Then subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. Leave a 5-star review, DraftKings handle, something you enjoy about the Pat Mayo Experience, and boom, you're in the draw for 100 DK bucks. Winners announced. Well, it used to be every Monday, but now we pre-tape Monday shows. It'll be sometime next week when we film a show that day. I will release the winners. And we'll have a mock draft coming out on Monday, more draft Tuesday and Wednesday, culminating with the draft prop show, where we can all lose money together betting on the NFL draft. Fun times. Joining me on the line to talk some more draft and a little bit of NFL news from EstablishTheRun.com, man who is digging into the NFL draft. I mean, more so this year. Probably, it's Evan Silva from Establish the Run, by the way, in case you didn't know. Are you doing more draft work this year that you're stuck at home, or is it just the same? This is what you were doing anyway.
I'd say it's about the same. But there's not as much data to work with and as much information to work with this year because there's no pro day workouts, because there are no scouts and executives on, the pro day trail talking with each other. Information gets out. Like, this is the least, the pre-draft lead up, least amount of information that has ever trickled out. And that's because everybody's staying at home. And so, I think that, there's just not as much information to work with, but at the same time, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to cover it, cover it as extensively as I possibly can.
So I feel like when people think Evan Silva, they think fantasy football rankings, they think EstablishTheRun.com and the big presence that you have in fantasy. I feel like it gets overlooked how accurate your mock drafts have been over the past few years. So congratulations for being good at this.
Thanks. I always wanted to be good at mock drafting. I was really, really bad for a long time. So, I finally got to be decent. And, yeah, I mean, it took a lot of trial and error,
Well, what do you find when you're trying to do a mock? Like, do you then have to put yourself into the position of, like, let's say when the Raiders are up and Mike Mayock is on the clock. There's a lot of information about Mike Mayock out there because he used to do the mock drafts and provide all the information. Do you have to put yourself into the position of the GM, or even like with the Giants? You're like, I'm Dave Gettleman. Here's what I actually prioritize, versus Evan Silva doing a mock draft and be like, oh, here's who should go here.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to, it kind of depends upon what you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to predict what will actually happen in the draft? Are you trying to discuss, what you think should happen? And, I used to do it. I would create my own big board, and then I would assign, players that, I thought that those teams should draft whenever they were on the board. And I mean, if you're trying to be predictive, that's the total opposite way that you should be doing it. What you should really be doing is trying to figure out, a little bit of the history of the people that are the decision makers for each team, and also using a crowdsourcing kind of approach, and looking at people that do have documented history of being good at predicting the draft. For a long time, that was Mike Mayock. Obviously he's not doing mock drafts anymore. Bob McGinn was really good for a long time, and I still think that his mock draft, longtime writer for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Green Bay Press Gazette, and he is now with The Athletic. But he actually started his own website there for a minute, and always looking at his mock drafts because he's super plugged in, seeing who he has players projected to. I think that has been really helpful. Daniel Jeremiah is the best mock drafter in big draft mainstream media. Always want to look at who he is predicting. Listen to his podcast. Tony Pauline, who is now with the Pro Football Network, He ran his own site for a really long time. He's really, really plugged in. I listen to all of his podcasts. Working at Roto World for a really long time, the foundation of Roto World as a website is the beat writers and the beat writer reports, and blurbing on Roto World for 10 or 12 years. I mean, I have a pretty good feel for which beat writers get stuff right, which beat writers get stuff wrong, which beat writers are just trying to like appease their audience, which is the fans. So just a combination of all those factors. I think that's what can get you on a decent path. And again, and I say this all the time, but no one's actually good at mock drafting. No one's actually good at it. The best guy each year, guy or gal, is getting like maybe 12 to 14 player to team matches. Like, that's sensational to be able to get 12 to 14 player to team matches. And that's less than, a 50% hit rate. So predicting the draft, and I think it's one of the things that makes the draft really special and so much fun is the unpredictability. And this year, I think, is going to, because of the dearth of information out there, this is going to be the most unpredictable draft that we've seen in a long time. Like, I think that in a normal year, getting 12 player to team matches would be great. I think this year, like maybe 8 or 9 would be great.
Well, it does seem like if everything stands how it is, 1 and 2, I don't want to say that they're absolutely locked in, but it does look like it's going to go Joe Burrow to Cincinnati. It looks like it's going to be Chase Young to Washington. And then after that, it seems like it could go almost any way. Like,
Yes.
do you expect the Lions to trade the 3rd pick? Because I kind of do.
I kind of do too. But, you have to consider, is it going to be harder for teams to pull off trades? I mean, they're going to have to set it up, I think, in the days leading up, and it's easier to do that at the top of the draft. So I do expect the Lions to trade the 3rd pick. But, I think that it's going to be more difficult than in years past. But I think that with 1 and 2 seemingly largely locked in, then the Lions should just be, spend the next week trying to figure out a way to get the best possible compensation and move down in the draft. I mean, they're a long way away. I mean, they need players, they need picks.
Well, how much do you think that the virtual draft is going to play a problem with this? Like, we definitely know that there's going to be some front offices who are stitching together. I mean, everyone's laughing at the picture of Dave Gettleman with his gigantic binder and his computer from 1992. I'm sure everyone just likes to pile on Dave Gettleman. I'm sure he's probably got it somewhat figured out. But there is going to be a discrepancy between.
You're sure about that?
I'm not sure about that. But yeah, if you're gonna pile on the guy, pile on him for his shitty process or bad picks or whatever it might be, his style.
But did you notice how that huge binder was between him and the computer? Like, why does he have that huge binder, like, obstruct? Like, can't he just keep it? There shouldn't be any space between, there shouldn't be like a massive binder between his body and the computer.
Maybe he likes to rest the computer up on the binder. Like, we talked about it on Monday. When you do a good Zoom chat, you want to elevate that camera just a little bit to make sure that you look all right. I mean, I'd be more concerned about, like, the guy's doing some NFL draft research. Then all of a sudden he's got, like, hand lotion within hand reach. I don't know what the hell's going on there. Like, is it really dry wherever Gettleman's at? I don't know. I don't want to say. But we know that there's going to be front offices that are really good at this. They're going to put in the time, or they have not necessarily younger people, because it could be, I know a ton of young people who suck at technology and older people that are great at it. It all depends on how tech savvy, how much investment that teams want to put into this, because I think it would be a huge advantage, especially when it comes down to trading. Like you said, at the top, you can probably plan that out a little bit because you know where you're going to pick. But once you get to picks like 12 and 13 and 14 towards the back end of the first round, or even as the draft goes into Saturday and Sunday, that the teams that are on the precipice of knowing how to use their tech, making sure that things don't fail, that they can communicate with everyone, might actually be able to steal a lot of value in drafts, because there's not going to be as many people on the spot in order to negotiate with. It's like being in your fantasy draft and you have the one idiot who times out on his picks every single time because he's like not paying attention to what's going on. He's not checking his cell phone that people are texting him. He's like reading a magazine from 4 months ago. And then you have the guy who's on the ball. Be like, oh, I can definitely make a trade with that guy. He's paying attention. I don't want to break it down to be as rudimentary as that, because there's going to be a lot of tech involved here. But being able to talk to people in real time and knowing that doesn't get fucked up, I think could be a huge advantage for someone to move up and steal something.
Yeah, and I also think that I think that one of the concerns was, and have you probably, I've been watching more news, actual national, and global news than I ever have in my life over the last, month or whatever. And, when they bring reporters on and their internet, isn't working very well, I mean, that's been like a common occurrence, whether you're watching, ESPN or you're watching CNN or Fox News or whatever it is that you like to watch. There has been like, the internet connection hasn't been very good often when they bring in like these experts. And so I think that could be an issue. I think that NFL teams and general managers will be looking to hit singles and doubles in this draft more so than swinging for the fences, at least in the first round and early on in the draft. I think that they're just going to try to get, solid football players. Their injury histories plummet. I think that we could see, players with like Brandon Ayuk, the receiver out of Arizona State. He has a core muscle surgery, which sounds just like a sports hernia surgery, which usually is like a routine recovery period. But I think that element of uncertainty, because, teams cannot bring these guys into their facilities and have their own team doctors put their hands, feel them all, examine them personally. That creates a great element of uncertainty that could lead to falls in the draft for guys like Brandon Ayuk to some extent, and certainly for Tua out of Alabama. I mean, there has been even some talk that and buzz that he could fall out of the top 10.
So does that mean that teams would end up like? Does that mean Love moves up the board? People just reach on Justin Herbert, or Herbert? Sorry. How does this end up working? Like, if he ends up falling, like if he falls outside the top 10, and then I assume someone would end up trading up. But let's say like one of the big three. I know they just signed. I was going to say Teddy Roosevelt, but Teddy Bridgewater. Like the Panthers at number 7, I find really intriguing because they just give Christian McCaffrey this gigantic contract. They just sign Teddy Bridgewater. They get rid of Cam Newton. Do they have the worst defense in the league? Because it kind of looks like that on paper.
Yeah.
So
it's real bad.
Like, could they take the quarterback?
And they lost, and they weren't very good last year. And they weren't very good last year on defense. And then they lost Luke Kuechly and James Bradbury. So, I mean, and those are at critical positions. I don't think that they will take a quarterback. I really don't. I think that they're going to be looking at defense, and I think they're going to be looking at Jeff Okudah if he makes it there. And I know that everybody thinks that he's just a lock to go to the Lions, but again, I think there's going to be a lot of surprises in this draft. Or Derek Brown, the big defensive tackle out of Auburn.
That's interesting. Yeah, maybe I guess their move is to build up both ends build up the trenches, build up the offensive line, build up the defensive line, and then 2 years from now, when there's like a quarterback on the board, or just tank for Lawrence next year, or potentially.
I mean, they do have a pretty significant commitment in Teddy Bridgewater at 3 years and about $20 million a year.
They do, but maybe they're just like, hey, look at the Rams when we can just pay $40 million for players to be on other teams, no big deal. So when we're looking at this, like, let's talk about McCaffrey for a second. He gets 4 for 64. He becomes the highest paid running back in the league, and everyone hates running back deals. These are going to be, it's outrageous to pay a running back this much. You can mine this from whatever. The only counter I will throw to that, it is a lot of money, but I mean, they're not going anywhere right now, so it really doesn't matter to their team if they're going to be bad anyway. But isn't he the type of running back that you would pay a lot of money to only because he is a running back and receiving hybrid? Like, isn't that the type of player that you would want because they do more than just being, a between the tackles runner?
Yes, but they could have gone about this in a smarter, more team-friendlier way. I mean, they had him at a really cheap cost in 2020, and then they had the team option year in 2021, and then they could have hit him with 2 franchise tags in consecutive seasons and paid him about 4 years and $50 million. Instead, they gave him 4 years and $64 million. So, I mean, I think that they just could have played their cards better. I mean, there was no indication that he was going to hold out or anything like that. And I think that they went a little too fast. I mean, I think that they I mean, I think they could have played their cards better in that scenario. But I agree with you that if you're going to pay a running back, you don't pay an early down grinder. You pay a guy who can dominate in the passing game. And Christian McCaffrey is, maybe the best receiving back in the NFL. So from that standpoint, it does make sense. I think that they could have gone about it in a little bit smarter way.
Well, now after McCaffrey gets this money, Joe Mixon's throwing up smoke signals that he's going to end up holding out from the Bengals. Holdouts, it's really tricky because obviously there's a pandemic going on. It seems like it'd be really bad PR right now to hold out, especially with the draft looming. Yeah. Your team has the number 1 pick. And as it pertains to like fantasy coming up for the upcoming year, if the holdout actually happens and even into training camp, like the past few years seemingly have taught us, don't take those guys early.
Yeah, and Joe Mixon is in a different position because he was not a first-round pick like Christian McCaffrey was. He's a second-round pick. So the Bengals have 1 year left of him. They don't have the option year. And so that's going to create a difficult situation, especially for them because they don't like to pay players their market value. The Bengals, I mean, they are historically a very much maybe the NFL's most penny-pinching franchise. They've also got a situation with A.J. Green where he was dissatisfied with his contract last year and his injury, we heard that his injury was not as severe as, the end result. He didn't play at all during the season and he probably could have come back at some point, but he was displeased with his contract situation. He gets hit with the franchise tag. That's another potential holdout situation when everything clears up. So, yeah, I mean, the Bengals have some really difficult decisions to make. And they did draft 2 running backs last year, Rodney Anderson and Travion Williams, and they do have Giovanni Bernard. So they do have some insurance behind Joe Mixon. But, yeah, I mean, they've got some really difficult decisions to make. I mean, and they're going to want to keep as much talent as they possibly can around Joe Burrow, being a young quarterback coming into the league with no offseason workouts, potentially abbreviated training camp. He's being pushed into a pretty difficult situation just because of the things that have happened around the world.
Not knowing how this ends up playing out or when the season's actually going to start, how long OTAs are going to be or how long the preseason is going to be, if there's any at all, do you think that continuity is going to matter a lot going year from year, heading into this season in particular?
Absolutely. And it already matters a lot. It's probably one of the most underrated kind of competitive advantages that NFL teams have on one another. Like my buddy Pat Thorman of Pro Football Focus, and now of Established the Run, posted an approximate value chart just straight off of Pro Football Reference, essentially ranking teams in how much value they've been able to get out of the draft over the last 20 years. And if you look at it, it's really just a ranking of continuity over the last 20 years. Which teams have had a ton of turnover, in the head coaching position, in their front office. Those are the teams that have drafted the worst over the last 20 years. Patriots, Packers, teams, Steelers that have had a lot of continuity. Those are the teams that are up top. And it makes perfect sense that would be the case, because when you have continuity in your coaching staff, in your front office, in your decision-making roles, then you can have a unified kind of vision in terms of, what kind of players do you want to add to your team? Which players fit the schemes of the defensive and coaches, defensive and offensive coaches, that, what did they like to run? And everybody can work together. But when there's a ton of turnover, that possibility is not there. So, and I think that will be especially pronounced because there's so little information out there this year, and teams are going to have to rely on their objectives as unified organizations, and also just studying the tape more than ever, because especially guys that weren't invited to the combine, like, there's no numbers on them.
So I want to get back to the McCaffrey thing for a second, because they could have saved, like, I hadn't even thought about it that way. You let yourself go out, you pick up the option, then you franchise, and you end up saving money that way. How come teams, and maybe they are, and I'm just overlooking it, how come they're not more creative in figuring out what year that the cap hit is actually going to matter? Like, if Carolina goes into the season, they're like, hey, we're not going to be very good. We're probably not going to win the division. Maybe everything breaks right. If we're going to pay you $64 million, could we have a cap hit of $30 million for you this year if we can squeeze it in? And then you're a very viable contract after that. Like, how come more? It's like when the Patriots trade up to the back end of the first round, knowing that if they draft a running back there, they get that extra year option because it's a first round pick. And that actually gives them far more team control in not having to go into this situation where it seems like other teams don't even think about this stuff.
Some teams have, and I think it's an interesting question because it's something that I have wondered myself a lot about. The 49ers did it with Jimmy Garoppolo, where they, had a ton of cap room, were able to jam a ton of his contract and, front load that contract to be able to, jam that into his initial years. And then he's pretty cheap going forward, but first of all, you have to have a lot of cap room to be able to do that, first of all, so that, that limits the number of teams that are capable of doing that. And then you have to find, players that, that you're willing to commit a ton of money to in those first initial years. So, but I think that, with Christian McCaffrey, like, I think that what the Panthers did was they just identified him, regardless of position almost. They identified him as a player that was a core player to them. They wanted to make sure that he knew that, because they did change their coaching staff, and there has been a lot of turnover in Carolina, and I think that keeping Christian McCaffrey, they probably view that as a big plus for the quarterback that they just invested in Teddy Bridgewater, having that versatile Swiss Army knife kind of workhorse running back that Christian McCaffrey is.
Yeah, I would think of it too in terms of, it's really hard to have a bad 1-year deal in the NFL. Obviously there are bad 1-year deals, but it was almost like that Kirk Cousins contract the first time around with the Vikings, where everyone's just like, oh my God, it's a lot of money for Kirk Cousins. 3 years, $93 million. But it's only 3 years. Sometimes the shorter end of the deal, like, the money is just money at that point. You can make it fit any way that you want. That even if you were able to basically turn one, like the Richard Sherman contract that he just got. So it's a 3-year deal, but essentially it's a 1-year, $7 million deal. They can get out of it right away. That it seems like you mentioned the Niners, they did with Jimmy Garoppolo. It seems like their front office is not necessarily leaps and bounds above everyone, but they're definitely on a different level than these teams that, like, I'm pretty sure that some teams do not consider this stuff, which just blows my mind.
Yeah, there was you remember there was an uncapped year. I think it was the year after the lockout, and the Redskins and the Cowboys tried to, like, jam a ton of their money into the uncapped year, and they actually wound up getting in trouble from the NFL, even though there were no rules against it. It was kind of like a big controversy. But I mean, I think that teams do think about it. It's just it has to be like the right situation. First of all, you have to have a ton of cap space, and then you have to, again, identify players that you really think are worth, get, like, front loading the heck out of their contracts.
Yeah, I suppose so. And there's far more risk to it than maybe I'm trying to let on when I'm talking about it. But it's also the unwillingness, I think, for a lot of teams to recognize the fact that they're bad or will potentially be bad in the upcoming year. Mm-hmm. It does strike me that all 32 teams go into the season and be like, we're going to be good this year and we're probably going to win the Super Bowl. If there was a little bit of self-assessment, is Carolina going to be bad? I don't think so. But again, maybe the fans will say, maybe the organization will say, going 6-10 or 7-9 is way better than going 2-14. I would actually argue the opposite, but that's me as an outside observer, not someone who's trying to protect my job at the same time. So it's a difficult balance to strike.
No, I'm totally with you on that concept. It's just that they have not, and I thought that they would operate with that approach in mind, but they really haven't. I mean, a lot of the signings that they've made, extending McCaffrey, signing Teddy Bridgewater, those are not quite indicative of a team, trading for Russell Okung. Those are not quite indicative of a team that is, aiming for a worse win-loss record. Like, I think that I think they're more focused on like building a culture and things like that. I mean, I think they're going to have an exciting offense. Like, we're going to like them in fantasy. They're going to be terrible on defense. Teddy Bridgewater, I think, is a good enough distributor to be able to get the ball consistently. DJ Moore, Ian Thomas, I like a lot. Obviously, McCaffrey, Curtis Samuel. They've got a pretty nice young offensive core, and I think that they're going to build around that. And I think they're going to be fun on offense.
Yeah, and it's going to be a situation as well where not only are they going to be good on offense, bad on defense, the other three teams in their division should also be very good on offense, that they're just going to perpetually, at least in my mind, be behind in trying to play catch-up going through the air the entire time. Like, would it be outside the realm of possibility that McCaffrey averages like 7.5, 8 catches per game?
No. I mean, I think that Christian McCaffrey's game perfectly suits Teddy Bridgewater's low ADOT game.
It's funny, like with the low ADOT, and maybe, do you think it's Teddy Bridgewater that he can't make the downfield throws, or he just wasn't asked to make the downfield throws with the Saints last year?
I mean, I think he's not a big armed vertical passer. I still think that he can throw the ball downfield. But I think it's his game. He's like a higher percent, and he was like this in Minnesota too. He's like a higher percentage, completion rate quarterback. And that's just kind of the style that at which he plays. He's not going to turn the ball, or, ideally, theoretically, he's not going to turn the ball over a lot. He's not going to give the ball to the other team. He's the anti-Jameis Winston. And that can be a good fit on certain teams in certain situations, especially when you put a lot of talent around him. I mean, I think that he's a guy that he's not necessarily going to elevate the talent around him, but I think that he can be elevated. Like, Andy Dalton had some really nice years when he had A.J. Green and Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu and Tyler Eifert all healthy. I think that he's an Andy Dalton-style quarterback with maybe a little bit more athleticism.
How does Robbie Anderson fit into this offense? Like, again, if he's going to be that's ideally where I would see Robbie Anderson making his biggest impact. If you already have a crisp route runner like DJ Moore, you have a gadget guy like Curtis Samuel, you have someone like Ian Thomas, or even Seth DeValve now, in order to clog up the seams, McCaffrey out of the backfield. It just seemed like a really weird signing to me. That where does he fit into this offense?
I think he's just going to be a role player. 40 catches, 680 yards, 4 or 5 touchdowns, and a guy that defenses are absolutely going to have to account for because of his speed, and he's going to make life easier for Ian Thomas and DJ Moore and Christian McCaffrey in the short and intermediate sections. I think he's going to be a role player, and he wanted to go there. I mean, there were reports that he turned down more money from the Jets to go play under Matt Rule, who was his coach at Temple.
And to not play for the Jets, which sounds like a pretty promising opportunity.
Right.
What do we do with running backs in the first round? Because I had Emery Hunt on yesterday, and I asked him kind of thing, but he's a former college running back. He does have a bias towards picking some of these guys high. And I was like, well, like, is it smart to pick Saquon Barkley at number 2? And his idea behind it was, if there is a quote-unquote generational type player that can do everything, stay on the field for all 3 downs, be effective in the passing game, pass blocking game, that, yeah, he wouldn't have a problem taking that sort of talent there. And I always think that, people are bad evaluators of talent as it is, that why would you lump yourself into a position where you could be wrong on a player like that? Then you're committed to them the entire time, and it's not a position that, even if you hit right, it's the greatest impact in the world in terms of how many games you're actually going to win. I actually like the back end of the first round running back because you get that extra year of control. I think that could logically make a lot of sense. Probably best suited for a quarterback if you're going to do it, and you can find a guy down there, trade up to the 30th pick, take your quarterback, a lot like what the Ravens did with Lamar Jackson. But where should running backs go in the first round, if at all? And do you think that any go in the first round this year?
I don't think that any go in the first round this year. I think that that's a pretty good prop bet. I know you can get some pretty good odds on that too. If you bet no running backs go in the first round. One of the factors that, one of the aspects you really have to factor in when you look at the running back position is how injury propense that position is as compared to other positions. No other position gets hurt like at the rate that running backs do. And so, you can talk about, oh, he's a generational talent. Oh, he's unique and, all this. Like Saquon Barkley got hurt last year and was highly ineffective. Okay, Saquon Barkley wasn't good last year. He was really one of the worst starting running backs in the league if you look at it from a Football Outsiders success rate standpoint. And, this is not just, a fantasy thing. I mean, this is like he wasn't very good last year. And he was, trying to play hurt, and running backs that, get 300 touches, the analogy is they have, they run into like 300 car crashes per season. And so that is a big thing that doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to investments into running backs. We saw it with Todd Gurley. We saw it with David Johnson. I mean, these guys get hurt, and it's not a good investment really from any standpoint. I love running backs. Like, I think that there's no better play in the NFL to watch from like an aesthetic standpoint than like running backs making big plays and big runs and, turning short passes into long gains and making guys miss. I mean, these guys are incredible athletes. I love watching running backs play. But, and I think that kind of fools us, is watching them play, how exciting Saquon Barkley is when he's, at his peak. But he is not a good investment, like whatsoever, at the top of any draft.
The total running backs drafted in the first round at DraftKings Sportsbook, as we speak right now, it's over under 0.5. The under is paying 2-1. So, does it happen? Once, I think it's probably 50-50, at least to me. I think that should probably be even money, shouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, but then you have your team, like you said, it's going to be a very unpredictable draft. Maybe some teams look at the board. Like, is there a consensus at running back of who the top running back should be? Because it seems to me like is DeAndre Swift the consensus number one, or is he someone you like the best, or is it like Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, that's where people want to go, or is it just like you could name 5 different guys that could be number one at running back?
No, I think it's DeAndre Swift and Jonathan Taylor, and they're so different that it's really hard to choose between them. Jonathan Taylor, I think the best comparison for him is, somewhere along the lines of Ezekiel Elliott. And then with DeAndre Swift, somewhere along the lines of Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara. And just very, very different players who, depending on their landing spot, depending on the creativity of their coaching staff, like that's going to be, that's really what, and whether they stay healthy, that's really going to be the determining factor as to, who we look back in 3 years and say, oh, clearly Jonathan Taylor was the better pick, or clearly DeAndre Swift should have been the first running back selected. Like they're neck and neck, I think, from like a scouting grade standpoint. And I think that, but they're just such different players that, they really should be almost, they play in very different styles. I thought it was interesting that Daniel Jeremiah has, and these guys are like, they use their intel in order to, so they're like a gauge of NFL teams because they use their intel to influence their rankings and their mock picks. And Gil Brandt had Jonathan Taylor significantly higher in his rankings than DeAndre Swift, and the opposite was true for Daniel Jeremiah. Daniel Jeremiah has DeAndre Swift ahead of Jonathan Taylor. I think they both go like in the 30s or early 40s.
Well, how far above with those two, how far are they above the next tier of guys like Akers and Dobbins and those sorts of players?
Yeah, I think that some people, like Dane Brugler, has J.K. Dobbins as his number one running back. So I think that there is kind of a push for J.K. Dobbins to be sort of maybe in his own tier. Like you have DeAndre Swift and Jonathan Taylor in the first tier, and then you have J.K. Dobbins maybe in his own tier, and then Clyde Edwards-Helaire really does have a unique skill set. 55 catches in one college season for a running back you don't see that very often. And that's what he had with LSU this past season. Austin Eckler kind of comparisons. I mean, you can line him up in the slot. So he's like but he ran 4.6 and he's 5.7. And those are going to create biases against him in terms of his draft slot. Like I like my running backs to be shorter, and I don't care that he ran 4.6 because I've seen him play and he's freaking awesome. But like, I think that those are going to create inherent biases as to where teams rank him. And when a team is on the board about to draft, are they going to select him? Like, oh, he's short and slow, and then Cam Akers is also in that mix, and then Zach Moss. I think that there's a fairly consensus top 6, but I think that really the top 4 backs are pretty clear in DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and J.K. Dobbins.
Well, if that's the case, and there is a consensus top 6, and maybe people have them ranked in different orders, that would lead me to believe that unless someone jumps the gun and starts a run, it's almost like after you get past the first tier of tight ends in your fantasy draft, like, oh, Kittle and Kelsey are off the board. Okay, well, let's start paying attention when the next guy goes off the board because they're going to start going boom, 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 because that's how people react. If the Dolphins don't jump at 26 on a running back, it's hard to envision someone else jumping the line. Like, did the Titans try to get, I mean, it's not going to be the Titans. They just re-signed Derrick Henry. I just don't know who ends up going towards the back end is the thing. So right. I'm only thinking of this in the version of, is that prop bet going to hit? And it seems like it should, unless, like I said, someone trades up into the back end of the first round. I think the Niners are going to trade one of their picks just because they have no picks after the first round, that it would make a lot of sense to trade back, I think, and try to gain some equity in this draft, knowing that you're so close. I mean, obviously they lost in the Super Bowl, but filling out a few depth pieces might be all they need. Like if they can get if they can replace DeForest Buckner at 13, or go get a receiver at 13, or turn 13 into, I don't know, like the top end of the second round in a third round pick or whatever it might be, that just gaining one stud player and then 2 pieces of good depth, that might be all they need. And maybe that's where a team jumps up and tries to get a running back, but it could be Jalen Hurts as well.
I'd love to see analytics Twitter when some team trades up for a running back.
But like I said, if you think, like, if the whole thing about running backs right now is like, I don't know if we're seeing this yet, but you see it, like, people aren't stupid in looking at this. Like, if you're
that's something that Ryan Pace does, okay? He trades up for a freaking running back.
There you go. So, I mean, it could be Chicago trade. Well, we don't have enough running backs as it is. I think we need more here. But, like, because of that 5th year thing, so you put off, I mean, if you're Carolina, apparently you don't, but theoretically you would get all 5 years with the team option, and then you can just, if you were willing to play the game right, you just let them free. Like, the best 5 years that basically any running back is going to have is the first 5 years of their career. You get that extra year. They're going to be paid well because they're a first-round running back, but it's not like off-the-charts stupid hurting your team type salaries. It would be like especially if it was like the 30th pick or something like that, then you're looking at, I don't know, like $5 million per year towards the end of it. Like, it's not unsubstantial, but it's not hurting you in any sort of way. And if that's all the resources you need to commit, if you get lucky, you can still get a top-end guy, and then you get him on a cheaper-end deal, where if you took him with the first pick of the second round, you lose that potential extra year that you get in the first round. I do see some logic behind it if this was the player that you're going to build around. It's just tough to know that 5 years in advance. You really have to get it right, or then you're committing far too many resources to a first-round pick in that spot. But I had somewhere to go.
Or you could trade up into the back end of the first round and use the pick on a player who plays a position that actually matters.
True. There's always that. Like I said, I think the Ravens, what they did with Lamar Jackson, is going to prove to be super prescient in like 2 years.
I mean, it already has proven prescient.
Right? Yeah, and then even from a financial standpoint, like, if you're...
Yeah, because it puts them in such a great financial standpoint for the next 2 and even 3 years.
And you're seeing them utilize it right now too. Like, they're putting that cap space to work with. Like, I was trying to think of it the other day. Who was the last corner that signed anywhere as a free agent that was like really, really good on a long-term deal?
You mean that it actually worked out? I mean, Byron Jones is that guy this year, but you mean that it actually worked out?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Like, signed with another team.
Yeah, like didn't re-sign. Like the one that always pops in my mind is Nnamdi Asomugha when he ended up signing with the Eagles on that giant
deal. What a
deal.
disaster.
It was, but like it was a really weird thing, and this is a bias that we get into with cornerbacks all the time, is that they have a really good year. The metrics prove that. And then there becomes a thing, inherent bias with the other teams. We're like, well, we're just not going to throw to his side of the field. So they get like 2 years of being perceived as the best corner in football, despite the fact that they don't do anything. They just stand there. No one even tries to challenge them at that point because it's so easy to throw to the other side of the field. And then once they re-sign or they sign with a different team, maybe they're in a new scheme, maybe their skills have deteriorated, or we just don't have the actual testing. Like, yeah, you can look really great if people throw your way 2 times a game.
I mean, there have been corners that, signed at reasonable rates that have worked out well with on their new team. I mean, Richard Sherman has worked out for the 49ers. AJ Bouye, I think, worked out for the Jags. But those guys weren't really top of the market guys. The last guy was Stephon Gilmore of the Patriots. He's worked out really well going from the Bills to the Patriots. But you're right. It is not a common occurrence that cornerbacks get top of the market deals, go to their new teams, and have a lot of success. And that goes back to our continuity discussion. There's absolutely an advantage to keeping your own, and I think that's really strongly highlighted at the cornerback position. I think you brought up a very good point.
Well, and I think that's potentially, instead of like trading the pick, maybe that's what the 49ers do at 31. Like, I know they brought Sherman back, but like I talked about, that deal is essentially a 1-year deal. They can choose to keep him, but we'll see how that ends up going. 3 of their 4 starting corners are all free agents, unrestricted, going after this season that we're going to come up, that they need to get an influx of high-end talent on that team that's under team control. So that seems like everyone's talking about wide receiver for them, but I think they need to continue to prop up that defense.
Yeah.
Do you think that they end up going wide receiver at 13, or did they just say screw it? Like, is wide receiver deep enough this year that you can find guys in the 5th round?
It is. I mean, the 5th round is a stretch, but 3rd and 4th round, I think it definitely is deep enough. I think the thing is that they're in that range of like, I think it starts at 9 with the Jaguars. It ends at number 16 with the Falcons, who could use a 3rd receiver. And then the Broncos are at 15, and the Jets are in there at 11. And there's just a bunch of teams from 9 to 16 that could use a receiver. And there are some truly awesome receiver prospects like Jerry Jeudy, and a Kyle Shanahan offense would be a thing of beauty. I mean, Henry Ruggs too. I mean, CeeDee Lamb, like these guys would fit in there like a glove. And that's kind of the range where I think that those receivers are going to go. And there's a lot of wide receiver needy teams in there. 12, Oakland, right in front of San Francisco, so I think it makes sense from that standpoint. I think that Javon Kinlaw, if they want to continue to add to that interior after trading away DeForest Buckner, Javon Kinlaw out of South Carolina, could be another consideration for them. There's no real corners that kind of fit into that range, but at 31, there are absolutely some corners. Christian Fulton out of LSU, Jalen Johnson out of Utah. But I think that, just kind of where they're positioned in the draft. And, wide receivers in need for them. Emmanuel Sanders is gone. Kendrick Bourne is there. Jalen Hurd, who didn't play as a rookie. Deebo Samuel is really all that you have to hang your hat on right now in the 49ers receiver corps.
It is, but I think you have to consider George Kittle a massive part of that as well.
Sure,
sure. When you look at the Chiefs, yes, Sammy Watkins is really good, but he's technically the 3rd guy. It's Hill, it's Kelsey, and then there's the rest of the pieces. I think a Shanahan offense can work that way as well.
Yeah.
So the other one, the point that I wanted to make earlier about running backs, that do you think that we're seeing a talent downturn because kids are going into college or they're in high school, maybe they play running back and they're assessing the situation, be like, no one values running backs. These contracts are way down. My career is super short. That you're losing a lot of talent from that position because kids are just saying, I want to play almost any other position. I know it's a glory position, but it's not one that's going to get me paid if I go to the next level. I should be playing receiver. Maybe I should be playing safety or corner or even outside linebacker who can get to the passer, that kind of thing. Do you think that's hurt the overall quality of running back?
I think that not yet. I think that that's something that could start to happen very soon. I mean, but if you look at the last two running back, and this isn't a great running back class, especially from a depth standpoint. I think there are some good prospects up top, but the depth is lacking. So maybe we're starting to see it set in. But if you look at the past couple of years, I mean, there have been a lot of good running backs that have come out of college over the last 2 years. And I think that this just happens to be a bad class. But I think that maybe it is starting to set in, but I don't think we'll really feel that effect, which I do think is coming. But I don't think we'll really feel that for a couple more years.
All right, let's close with quarterbacks because, I mean, that's all anyone really cares about anyway is the quarterbacks. Burrow, is there a 1% chance the Bengals don't take Burrow and they take Chase Young instead?
1%? Yeah.
Okay, so it's not impossible.
Chase Young instead? No,
yeah.
no, not Chase Young. I'm sorry, I didn't listen to the end of what you said there.
Who would it be if it wasn't Joe Burrow?
I think the scenario would be the Dolphins trade to one.
Okay, interesting. And then
Dolphins have the need, they have the ammunition, and I mean there are reports that they just love Joe Burrow.
Well, how much better is Joe Burrow, do you think, than the rest of the quarterbacks in this class?
I mean, I think a healthy Tua would have a case to be made. But I think that with the injury factor, I think that Joe Burrow is in his own tier.
So a healthy Tua would be up there. Is Herbert closer to those two guys, or is he closer to like the Loves and the Hurts of the world?
I mean, I don't think that he's on par with Tua and Burrow, but it seems like a lot of NFL teams disagree with my take because it looks like he's going to go pretty early, like a lock for the top 10, and quite possibly, just doesn't get past the Chargers at 6.
It's funny. Almost every single person I've talked to doesn't like him whatsoever. And yet when I continue to see like the mocks or I hear the reporting that he could be picked over Tua, that kind of thing. What is it that enamors people with him? Is it this like unforeseen mobility that he all of a sudden has that we saw in the last game that he actually played? Or is it, like he's basically coordinated Brock Osweiler?
To be fair, like a lot of people didn't like Daniel Jones coming out last year. A lot of people the year before didn't like Josh Allen. He's had a level of success. I know he's, a scattershot, erratic passer, but he's such a good runner that I think it makes up for a lot. A lot of people didn't like Lamar Jackson, so, but with Justin Herbert, I mean, he checks like every box from a tool standpoint. He's big. He's like 6'6", 230. He's a really good athlete on paper, and he's got a big arm. But, I mean, he was not an aggressive passer at Oregon. I mean, he averaged right around 8 yards per pass attempt, and that's not a big-time number at all in college. And he didn't really put that athleticism to use functionally on the field, I didn't think. I question like his touch and his accuracy in the short and intermediate section. So I think that there are like a lot of flaws. I think that you can, if you put yourself in the mind of he's like an off the charts intangible guy. And, he's really clean as a prospect until you watch him repeatedly and see that he really doesn't have consistent ball location.
Let me ask you this then. So if, let's say, Tua and Burrow are off the board, so that means either the Dolphins have picked Tua, then the Chargers are left standing there, just kind of looking into the void, or the Chargers or Jags trade up to pass. I'm probably not going to be the Jags, but let's say the Chargers move up to where the Lions pick, they pick Tua, and then the Dolphins are stuck there with Herbert. Do you think it makes more sense to take Herbert with that pick or take the best possible player at any position and then take a quarterback at the beginning of the second round?
So this is, again, what do I think that they should do versus what do I think they will do? I think they will take Justin Herbert if he's there at 5. And I think there's a chance that they might even like try to trade up to get him. I mean, they have a ton of ammunition. And the Miami Herald has been relentless in telling us that the Dolphins love Justin Herbert. And I believe him. And there's a lot of good reporters there. Armando Salguero, Barry Jackson. They're a very well-covered team, especially by that specific newspaper. So I believe that. What do I think they should do? Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. I mean, I think that they should get. I think they should try to get Tua. I really do. I think that he's probably not going to be a factor in his first season, but I think that I think that he's a better prospect than is Justin Herbert. Because in terms of position player, like they need a left tackle, and that is a range in which I think Tristan Wirfs out of Iowa could go. Mekhi Becton out of Louisville, he could go. And so I think that if you're looking at a position player, you're looking at a left tackle, and then you're maybe trying to use your other 2 first-round picks to get back in position, maybe to catch a falling Tua.
Catch a falling Tua, or you can just see how the draft is playing itself out. Who needs a quarterback? Who doesn't? And like I said, do you think that Jordan Love's going to go in the first round? Maybe Patriots?
Yes, I'm not as like I went to the combine and the talk there was that he could like go in the top 10. But I think that feeling has kind of faded away. And I think that he goes in the 19 to 30 range, starting with the Raiders at 19, Patriots at 23, Saints at 24. The Packers are at 30. So I think that he goes somewhere in that range. But I'm not fully confident that he goes first round. I think that he is a guy that could slip into the 30s or 40s.
And would you, if you had to wager on it, would you say that Love goes ahead of Jalen Hurts? And where do you think Jalen Hurts ends up going?
I do think Love goes ahead of Jalen Hurts. Man, Jalen Hurts is really interesting. You watch him early in his career at Alabama, and he was really young, man. But he was terrible. I mean, as a passer at least. And he goes to Oklahoma. It's everything's very, very schemed there under Lincoln Riley. But I mean, he made major strides as a passer, and he's a dynamic runner. And we've seen it with quarterbacks that are not great passers like Josh Allen, who have been functional starters early in their careers and mixed in some dynamic moments when they have that weapon that is their legs. And Jalen Hurts is going to bring that to the NFL. Where do I think he goes? I don't know, like 45 to 55, somewhere in there, I think. I at the same time, like if he did go in the early 30s, late 20s, I think that I don't think anybody should be shocked by that, just to try to get that 5th-year option.
So final thing, we're going to see where these quarterbacks all shake down, then we'll have a better sense of that going forward. Whether it be the Jags, the Chargers, the Raiders, the Patriots. Where do you think Cam and Jameis end up?
Cam, I think, makes sense to the Jaguars. I would not rule out the Patriots after the draft. If the Patriots come out of the draft with nothing at quarterback, and they just have Jarrett Stidham and Brian Hoyer, I think that they might look at Cam if he's willing to take a reasonable contract, like 1 year, $10 million. But I think the Jaguars have picked up steam as a potential destination for him. Jameis Winston, I mean, I think he's going to have to settle for a backup job. And if you look at the decision makers that were in Tampa Bay when he was drafted, Dirk Cutter was his coach. He's in Atlanta. Could Jameis Winston go back up Matt Ryan? They know him within the division. I don't think that's crazy. It doesn't feel right, but I don't think it's crazy. And then the Titans, John Robinson, the Titans GM, he was in the front office when the Buccaneers selected Jameis Winston. And John Robinson, I mean, they could use a backup for Ryan Tannehill, although Jameis Winston, I think, might present too much of a threat to a quarterback that they just gave a 4-year, $118 million deal in Tannehill. So, but that's the best that I can come up with for Jameis Winston, is that he's just going to have to take a backup deal with someone that still has some, on a team that is run by someone who still has some level of belief in him when he was coming out of Florida State.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that Jameis might have too much talent to put behind Tannehill, and you don't want to create that weird dynamic. Is that what happened with Chicago? Why they traded for Foles? Like, we can't bring in someone who's like better than Trubisky. How about someone he can just compete with? And maybe Foles beats out Trubisky, but Trubisky has an opportunity here. You bring in Cam, you bring in Jameis. Like, Trubisky is no longer your starter. They're the starter.
Yeah. I think that there's an element of Ryan Pace still is holding out hope that his failed draft pick will work. His embarrassingly failed draft pick will work. And then there's so much familiarity with Nick Foles in Chicago. Matt Nagy was with him in Kansas City. They've got John DeFilippo on staff now. He was the guy who engineered Nick Foles going to the Jags last year. There's just a ton of familiarity with him, and even with I think Nick Foles is going to be the Bears starter this year because I know for sure that Matt Nagy does not believe in Mitchell Trubisky. So I think that Nick Foles is going to be their starter, but they aimed a little low, due in part due to the comfort level with the coaching staff, and due in part because I think that if Ryan Pace had the Cajones to really take a swing at a difference making game changing quarterback like Cam Newton, but he doesn't have that.
Is it almost like with Case Keenum going to the Browns where Stefanski's there? It's just like, hey, he's going to know this offense. Let's insert him as the backup. That way we don't need to deal with this.
Yes. Although I don't think that obviously Case Keenum is much of a threat to Baker Mayfield in the near term. And I think that Foles is just going to be the Bears starter.
Yeah, I mean, that's completely fair. It just seems like if anything was to happen to Baker, this seems like a very logical transition. Although this Baker thing could get really interesting. Like if he wasn't very good last year, and obviously the coaching staff was terrible, and you're asking him to learn this brand new system coming into this year, and there's no off season to do so. I'm sure he has the playbook, but if you're not actively practicing all this stuff, it might be a bit of an adjustment period, and it could be the second straight year where the Browns win the offseason but aren't good on the field.
No, I mean, look, after you play as poorly as Baker Mayfield did last year, you certainly can't rule out, the possibility that, just the trajectory is downward for him. But I do think that Kevin Stefanski is going to put him in a lot of more optimized situations. I really think the coaching was very, very bad in Cleveland last year.
All right. Evan Silva, you have everything up on EstablishTheRun.com right now, and everything is free up on EstablishTheRun.com right now, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So I suggest everyone go check that out. What else do you have coming out before the draft? You have a mock-up right now, your top quarterbacks, your top running backs, sleeper wide receivers. What new content should we expect in the final week?
Well, I just did a podcast with Matt Kelly, Fantasy Mansion on Twitter. And the last 2 years we did podcasts about the Browns and the Giants, kind of just really taking an in-depth exploration into those franchises. And we did that this year regarding the Texans and Bill O'Brien and Bob McNair. So if you're into listening to podcasts that really take a really deep dive into the dysfunction that results in Bill O'Brien becoming maybe the most powerful head coach in the NFL, definitely right up there with Belichick, then you could check that out.
That it still blows my mind, Bill O'Brien. Anyway, Evan Silva, you can follow him on Twitter, Evan Silva, like I mentioned, EstablishTheRun.com. For me, at ThePME, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I told you about the draws at the beginning of the show, but it is highly important, especially right now with podcasts on the dip. With no commuting going on, fewer people are listening to podcasts, so please go download the Pat Mayo Experience. If you subscribe, leave a 5-star review, DraftKings handle. I got you in a draw for 100 DK bucks. I mean, boom. Who couldn't use 100 DK bucks right now? So get yourself in that draw by subscribing to the audio podcast. Thank you all for watching. Hit the description for all of the NFL draft coverage, mock draft, prop bets, everything, wide receiver breakdowns coming Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week. So stay tuned. I'm Pat Mayo. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
Mayo Experience! Experience!